Hello everyone, welcome back to NewsRoom. I'm Chella Smith. This is your Middle East U.S. entertainment news here on YouTube. I air on Fridays. I bring you the latest on reforms and economics Iraq based on reports put out by the Middle East news media outlets. I do this weekly review and it's based off my interests. Thank you everyone for joining me. Last week we talked about Iraq taking back control, the dinar exchange rates, the U.S. federal banks, and the Jordan memorandum. Let's take a look at this week's headlines. It's said by Al Sumeria TV, after years of continuous disagreement between the center and the region, the flame between rapprochement between the two parties has grown to resolve oil and gas laws, which has been neglected due to the disagreement over how to manage oil wealth. The hadiths within the corridors of parliament revolve around the existence of rapprochement between the center and the region on the fundamental point of contingence between the two parties, which is oil and gas law, a law guaranteed by the Sudanese government within the paragraphs of the ministerial platforms to resolve and end the controversial existing over the past governments and parliamentary sessions. Resolving the law would be a radical solution to dispute over oil and wealth between Baghdad and Erbil, while the Nepal oil and gas committees continue to make some amendments and put forward proposals, most notably the establishment of oil companies in the region, Kyrgyzstan linked to the Federal Oil Ministry, and this will contribute to reducing the gap between the two sides. NRTTV.com reports Iraqi delegation headed by Foreign Minister Fuad Hassan, who is currently in Washington, D.C., confirmed that the government measures aim to reform the banking system on Friday. Foreign Minister spokesman Ahmad al-Sahif said Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs and his accompanied delegation met with the U.S. Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, Assistant Secretary, and the Treasury, and senior employees of the ministry confirmed with Iraq and the Middle East, pointing out that the measures of government and the central bank in developing the reforming monetary policy and the government's priority in promoting investment in trade, diversifying energy sources, and facing current challenges at a monetary and banking level. The reforms of these measures reflect the banking system by combating corruption and money laundering, and the importance of continuing technical meetings between the specialists in this aspect. And earlier today, Kyrgyzstan24.net, Lori Mallory reported Fahid Hassan, Iraqi Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, began talks in Washington on Thursday in the first visit of the senior Iraqi delegation to the U.S. since the country's new Prime Minister, Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, took office last October. The discussions were held within the context of the U.S.-Iraq Strategic Framework Agreement, which was concluded in 2008 by George W. Bush administration in order to lay the basis for the enduring U.S. relationship with Iraq as Bush left office. As he visited the State Department, Hassan was greeted warmly by Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who welcomed him as my longtime friend, saying, "We have worked together for many years, too many years," Blinken said, "but it was always wonderful to have you here." In response, "Thank you very much for your friendship, a personal friend, but also you are a friend of the Iraqi people," Hassan responded. This was as State Department spokesman Ned Price later explains the first time that the meeting of the Higher Coordinating Committee of Strategic Framework Agreement focused almost the entire economic issue. Those issues included stabilization of the Iraqi currency, which has experienced a sharp decline as the U.S. has sought to prevent Iran from circumventing sanctions by exploiting the Iraqi banking system. In addition to discussing at the State Department, Hassan also met with senior officials at the Treasury Department. Hassan told Kyrgyzstan24 that the considerable progress has been made. The Iraqi currency will be stabilizing, he said. Americans have a good understanding of the situation, while the discussion he had at the Treasury Department would have a positive impact on the value of the Iraqi currency. In addition, as Blinken explained, their talks includes the subject of energy development, particularly the electricity generation. Iraq can and should be strongly energy dependent, and this is something that I think that the United States and others can continue to support Iraq as it moves in that direction, Blinken stated. Already this year, under the previous Iraqi government, the Ministry of Electricity announced plans to increase power productions and reach energy independence by 2025. Combating climate change was the third item on the agenda, as Price told journalists before affirming a key point: the United States supporting a strong, stable, and sovereign Iraq. Indeed, Hussein spoke similarly to Kyrgyzstan 24, saying that he feels there is a strong support within the U.S. for Iraq. Last week, U.S. President Joe Biden and Iraqi new Prime Minister spoke by telephone in preparation for Hussein's visit. In fact, Jordan's King Abdullah was meeting with Biden at the time and joined in on the call. The Biden administration has been promoting relations between Iraq and American Sunni Arab allies, including Kuwait. If successful, that will help anchor Iraq within a set of countries with which the U.S. has friendly ties, while the oil-rich states among them may invest in Iraq, promoting its economic development. Although diplomatic relations between Baghdad and Kuwait were restored already in 2004, tensions and mistrust generated by Saddam Hussein invasion has long lingered. Until 2021, Iraq was obliged to pay reparations to Kuwait following its explosions from the Sheikhdom in the 1991 Gulf War. The debt was repaid after 20 years. Similarly, until 2021, Iraq was still returning archives and other properties it had stolen from Kuwait during its occupation of its small southern neighbor. The Sunni government appears to be making serious efforts to normalize ties with the Sunni Arabs. In November, a month after taking office, Soudani traveled to Jordan and Kuwait, his first office visit abroad as Iraqi Prime Minister. Currently, Soudani is visiting the UAE, while the Saudi foreign minister last week was in Baghdad, where he had discussions with his Iraqi counterparts and the other senior officials. I've mentioned this before. Baghdad Magazine News reports the Prime Minister's advisor for financial affairs, Mauser Mohammed Shalay, confirms today that the central bank package will accelerate the levels of meetings, the demand for foreign currency, while explaining the reason for exchange rate difference between the officials and the rate in parallel markets, between the recent rise in the artificial and based on false information called color noise, and does not match the strength of. Shalay said to official agencies that there is a difference between the balance of supply and the demand force in money markets and the strength of intervention of monetary policy in this transitional period by regulating the assets of foreign trade procedures and meeting the financial needs of foreign currencies by the banking sector, and in accordance with international compliance rules on one hand. He added, these people trade based on confused or colored information that is traded in gray markets to achieve fatal profits that are done at the expense of legality of procedures and arrangements followed by monetary policy and stabilizing the general level of prices and work at the new official exchange rate, without realizing from them that the importance of implementing the strong equation between the strengths of high. He added that due to the weakness of the regular markets institutions in verifying the positive signal of the strength of the national economy and the strength of its reserves, which exceeds $115 billion, the market is still affected by the so-called economy color noise. He pointed out that color noise is embodiment of false, confused information based on rumor to generate price noise and artificial deviations to achieve fatal and peak profits at the expense of impact on price stability itself, without real awareness of the two important things. He pointed out that the first of these two things is the foreign trade arm of the government, which works in accordance with international trade rules and carries flexibility and very high potential in providing commodity supply at stable prices in any moment. And the second is the roll of active package launched by the Central Bank of Iraq, on which monetary policy is working to accelerate the opening up the levels of these meetings. Shafak News went on to report that the Iraqi Ministry of Finance started preparing the new budget bill based on the new U.S. dollar exchange rate against the dinar, which is 130,000 IQD for every 100 USD. The source added that the process will need several days and will be submitted to the Council of Ministry next week. Iraq's central bank, CBI, announced proceeding with the selling U.S. dollar at the new exchange rate of 1320 dinars to one starting from Wednesday. Shafak News then went on to report that the U.S. dollar, the USD exchange transaction against the Iraqi dinar, IQD, inched lower in the markets of Baghdad and Erbil Wednesday. Shafak News agency's correspondent said that the USD recorded a rate of 154,000 IQD to 100 in Al Qaifa and Al Herthia Central Exchange. The selling and buying rates of the USD in Baghdad parallel markets settled at 146,000 and 144,000 IQD to 100 respectively. The USD selling and buying rates in Erbil opened at 148,900 and 148,800 IQD to 100 respectively. The Iraqi Council of Ministry approved the decision of the Board of Directors of the Central Bank of Iraq to set the Iraqi dinar IQD to US dollar USD exchange rates at the following: 1,300 IQD per 1 USD, the purchasing price from the Ministry of Finance; 1,310 IQD per 1 USD, the sales price of the banks; 1,320 IQD per 1 USD, the sales price by banks and financial institutions to the final beneficiary. The Iraqi dinar had been selling at 1,470 dinars against the dollar before the New York Federal Reserves introduced tighter controls on international dollar transactions by Iraqi commercial banks in November.